We learned, of course, just a couple of days ago of that terrible tragedy in Baltimore, Maryland. Cargo ship ramming a bridge. Maybe ramming is not the correct term to use, but when it hit the bridge, that bridge collapsed, the Francis Scott Key Bridge. From last I heard, we now know there have been 2 confirmed deaths. Police or divers still thinking there may be 4 more people. There are 4 more people unaccounted for. But a lot of the questions surrounding what happened, and I know some of them concern the bridge itself and just how a bridge like this could actually have crumbled the way this one did. And what's more amazing is we have video. Typically these things, after the fact, we get to look at this and try to piece it together. This was actually all caught on live camera when it happened at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And you can actually see, what's about to happen, the impact of that cargo ship into the bridge, and to watch it crumble like a Meccano set. It's almost unreal. It's surreal to watch. But now, of course, is the investigation trying to understand how this happened in the first place. Captain Alain Arseneault is Executive Director with the National Center of Expertise on Maritime Pilotage. He is on the line. Mr. Arseneault, thanks for your time this afternoon. Let me begin by asking, you've seen what we've all seen, how this happened. Can you explain to us what you believe actually happened here? How did this happen?
Yeah, well, I think we have enough information now to know that what happened is a blackout. The vessel had a mechanical critical failure. What we call the blackout in the industry, that took away any ability to maneuver. The engines were down, electricity was down, everything was down. So he lost power at a critical moment without enough time to recover from that, enough time and space to recover from that, basically.
When you say lost power, you think at that point the cargo ship would just basically be immobilized and wouldn't go anywhere, just be dead in the water, but that's not what happened. So how do we explain that?
Yeah, because when they lost power, the ship was already making way at 8 knots towards the bridge. It's about 15 kilometers an hour. For a ship of that size, it takes a lot of space and time to stop a vessel at that speed. So she was already making 8 knots, lining up the bridge when she lost power for the first time. And she actually, from the footage we can see, she actually lost power twice in a very short period of time. And we're talking about 4 minutes before she hit the bridge. So when she first lost that power, since she was already making way, then there was no way for her to try and reverse the engine or even probably use the rudder. I think I'm not sure if they had the rudder still going there, because usually when you have an entire shutdown, you also lose the rudder. So it's the ability to change direction. So she basically went on a spin to starboard, to the right, and there was not much they could have done at that time to stop it.
Have you seen this kind of thing happen before? First of all, the idea of losing power, I can't imagine that's all that unusual. So have there been other incidents like this that you're aware of?
Vessels do lose, momentarily power. It happens in all parts of the world. I don't want to scare anyone. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And pilots and captains and the crews are trained to deal with that kind of situation. In that particular situation in Baltimore, it just happened in the worst of moments, when she was doing a critical approach to a critical infrastructure, that is a bridge. It might happen. It does happen. Usually there are ways to deal with that. You try and minimize the impact. There's emergency generators that usually kick in to give you the minimal power you need to communicate, and usually use the rudder. And then, there's the anchors you can use. If there are tugs available, you can be assisted by tugs to try and help you redirect the vessel. But when it happens, usually it's the vessel would go aground. Typically, would come out of the channel and go aground. But in that particular case, since the bridge was so close, they hit the bridge.
Yeah. Can you, if you had to imagine yourself in that situation, you're the captain of this vessel, this happens, and apparently from what I've read, he put out a mayday fairly quickly, which people are saying, thank God for that, because otherwise the death toll, or at least, what happened, could have been much, much worse as far as people on that bridge. So what would he have been doing when this happened?
Yeah, there's a bridge team working. So you have the actual ship captain that sails with the ship, and you have the pilots, the American local pilots that were on board, with an EMS person actually, holding the wheel and following directions from the pilots. And at that time, when that happened, I think what they did was the perfect thing to do. They actually called the VTS to tell them they had just lost power, and they tried to call the tugs that they had used for undocking the vessel half an hour earlier and told them to come and help in an emergency, see if the tugs could make their way quickly to the vessel to assist, and made that mayday call that saved a lot of lives. That was the right thing to do. And at the same time, they were trying to do everything they could to avoid hitting the bridge. Obviously, one of the things they did, what we can see from the VDR, the voice data recorder that was analyzed by the NTSB, they actually dropped the port anchor. So that's one thing you would do to try and slow down the vessel, but also to try and change the direction of the shear that the vessel was initiated towards that pillar. So they did the right thing, in my opinion. If what I read is right, if that's what they did the right thing in trying to drop that port anchor to stop the starboard swing that had initiated after the blackout towards the pillar.
I'm wondering as well, I'd read a report, maybe you could comment, I don't know if you've seen this as well, in trying to understand why this blackout might have happened. I read something about now and I don't know how much information will come from that voice data recorder that can help better understand how it happened. I read something that I would never have guessed, which said maybe it had something to do with contaminated fuel. Have you seen that?
I read that also. That's one of the speculations. A lot of things can happen to unfortunately create a blackout on board a vessel. It could be, electrical problem, overload problem, just a limit switch problem. There's so many. A ship is a big moving object with a lot of mechanical structures into it and mechanism. You have the generator set producing the electricity. A lot of the time, it has to do with overload of the generator. And it often happens when they are fully used. So that's, approaching the dock or leaving the dock when you are using the ship's equipment at its full potential. So using the thrusters, using the propellers and all that. So it's, when it happens, it usually happens close to dock infrastructures. And so what happened there, to me, is not a surprise. I mean, in fact, that she had a blackout, it does happen. And contaminated fuel is one of many reasons it might have happened. Yeah.
Is it fair to assume that by virtue of the fact that they have, I guess, the equivalent of an airline black box, you called it a voice data recorder, will that provide enough information that they can figure out what happened?
I would say so, but probably they would have to, they will inquire mechanically, what really caused the blackout, and I'm quite confident that the NTSB will be able to find out the real root cause of what caused the blackout, and I'm not sure it would entirely come from the VDR, but I'm sure they will find out why it blacked out.
Yeah, just as the last thing you said, this is not uncommon for power blackouts. So, of course, what happens when you see this in Montreal, for example, we look at the bridge, the Jacques Cartier Bridge, and think, oh my God, could something like this happen here? But to your point, I mean, that answer would be, I guess, yes, right? This could happen anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I want to reassure the public, your listeners, that it's really rare that it does happen. It does. I mean, there's 22,000 pilot assignment on the St. Lawrence River in a year, 22,000, and you might see one or two blackouts, every other year or something. It's a very rare event. And usually, as I said, it happens right after the vessel leaves the dock or just before it comes close to the dock when you're, using the equipment at its full potential. But the bridges on the St. Lawrence River are well protected. The abutments are protected by putting the stones around it. I'm looking for the English word there, but and like the Jacques Cartier Bridge in Montreal, if you look at the Jacques Cartier Bridge on the north side of the river between the Montreal and Ile Notre Dame, there, one of the pillar is ashore, and the other pillar is in 5 meters of water. So basically, a vessel would go aground before it would hit the bridge. Okay. And if you look at the southern part, the entrance of the seaway. At St. Lambert, one of the pillars is ashore, and the other pillar is made of a huge concrete structure. And the vessels that go into the seaway are a smaller sized vessel, and we're limited by the speed when we get in there. So the vessels are moving at very slow speed, so you wouldn't have that kind of impact. Okay, breathe a little easier today. Look, I know it's going to take a long time for this investigation to conclude before we find out, by the way, anything about what happened. And by the way, my understanding is they can't even take anything off this cargo ship, right, until this is done. Everything stays in place as is? Yeah, it's going to take a while. Yeah. Wow. All right, Captain, thank you so much. We appreciate your time today. Yeah, you're welcome.